The transmission arrived on a crisp autumn morning, cutting through the global communication networks like a blade of pure possibility. At first, most believed it was an elaborate hoax. The holographic message flickered in government halls, research centers, and living rooms across the planet, a shimmering invitation that seemed to defy the very laws of probability. Dr. Maya Chen first saw the message during her morning research session at the Global Adaptive Systems Laboratory. She was knee-deep in a project studying ecosystem resilience, her workspace a controlled chaos of biological samples, quantum computation arrays, and wall-sized screens displaying complex environmental models. The room hummed with the quiet intensity of cutting-edge scientific exploration, a sanctuary where the boundaries between disciplines blurred like watercolors. The message came from the Nexus Collective, a name that sent tremors through every scientific community on Earth. Most considered the collective a myth, a whispered legend among astrophysicists and xenobiologists. They were supposedly a council of the most advanced civilizations in the known universe, beings so far beyond current understanding that their very existence seemed more like a theoretical concept than a reality. Attention, planetary civilization of Earth. The holographic transmission began, its voice a complex harmonic that seemed to resonate differently with each listener. You are hereby invited to attempt the stellar convergence test. Maya's colleagues initially erupted in laughter. The stellar convergence test was more than just a challenge. It was the ultimate intellectual gauntlet. For thousands of years, it had broken the computational spirit of countless advanced civilizations. No species had ever come close to solving even the first stage of the test, let alone completing the entire challenge. The selection process began immediately. Governments, research institutions, and independent think tanks launched unprecedented global trials. This wasn't a simple academic competition. The test promised something far more profound, a chance for humanity to prove its worth on a galactic stage. Maya found herself thrust into a selection process that defied traditional metrics of intelligence. The trials were unlike anything humanity had ever conceived. Candidates faced challenges that merged psychology, quantum mechanics, artistic creativity, and environmental adaptation. Traditional IQ tests were meaningless. The evaluators sought something far more nuanced, the ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos, to adapt instantaneously, to communicate across seemingly impossible barriers. Her own journey to selection was anything but typical. Maya had never been the stereotypical genius. Her academic path was a meandering river of interdisciplinary exploration. She had studied quantum physics, but also spent years working with indigenous communities in the Amazon, learning traditional ecological knowledge. She was a concert-level pianist who could deconstruct musical patterns with the same ease she analyzed quantum states. The final selection process was a grueling 3-month marathon of tests that pushed human potential to its absolute limits. Candidates were placed in scenarios that challenged every conceivable understanding of problem solving. They navigated virtual environments that changed based on their emotional states, solved puzzles that required simultaneous artistic and mathematical thinking, and demonstrated adaptability in situations that would break most computational systems. Maya stood out not through raw intellectual power, but through her unique approach to understanding complexity. Where others saw obstacles, she saw conversations. Where traditional scientists sought to control and measure, she sought to understand and collaborate. When the final selection was announced, the world watched in collective anticipation. Out of millions of candidates, only 12 humans remained, and at the top of that list was Dr. Maya Chen. A selection that surprised many, but made perfect sense to those who truly understood the nature of the challenge. The Nexus Collective's invitation was more than a test. It was an opportunity for humanity to demonstrate that intelligence isn't about processing power, but about the ability to see beyond established boundaries, to reimagine what was possible. As Maya prepared for the greatest challenge of her life, of her species' life, she understood something profound. This wasn't just about solving a puzzle. This was about showing the universe what humanity could truly become. The countdown to the stellar convergence test had begun. The arrival platform of the Galactic Convergence Arena defied every known principle of spatial engineering. It existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, a crystalline structure that shifted and breathed like a living organism. Holographic interfaces flickered with impossible geometries, displaying information in wavelengths that would drive a normal human mind to the brink of madness. Maya Chen stood at the entrance, her simple black research jacket a stark contrast to the elaborate technological augmentations of other species representatives. Around her, beings from across the known universe prepared for the most challenging intellectual challenge in galactic history. To her left, a delegation from the Quantum Harmony Collective, silicon-based lifeforms whose bodies were living computational matrices, hummed with anticipation. Their bodies were a network of light and energy, complex algorithms made manifest. They regarded Maya with what could only be described as clinical curiosity, their translucent forms pulsing with computational rhythms. On her right, a representative from the Stellar Weave Confederation moved with liquid grace. This being appeared to be made of pure energy, capable of shifting between solid and plasma states at will. Its communication happened through complex light patterns that would have been invisible to most human perceptual systems. The initial briefing was a sensory assault. Holographic displays erupted around the candidates, creating a three-dimensional space that defied traditional understanding of information presentation. Each participant received a personalized interface that adapted to their specific cognitive processing capabilities. Zorix, the lead adjudicator of the Nexus Collective, materialized at the center of the arena. He was a being of pure mathematical precision, a crystalline entity that seemed to be simultaneously a living creature and a complex computational system. When he spoke, the sound wasn't heard but directly experienced, a linguistic transmission that bypassed traditional auditory systems. Participants of the Stellar Convergence Test, Zorix began, his communication a complex tapestry of mathematical precision and emotional undertones. You stand at the threshold of the most challenging intellectual pursuit in known galactic history. The first stage of the test materialized around them. It was less a physical challenge and more a cognitive landscape, a multi-dimensional puzzle that existed simultaneously as a mathematical problem, an artistic composition, and a living ecosystem. Participants would need to navigate this space using skills that went far beyond traditional problem-solving. Maya observed the initial reactions of her fellow candidates. The Quantum Harmony Collective began processing with machine-like precision, their computational matrices spinning complex algorithms at speeds that would have fried any human neural network. The Stellar Weave representative seemed to merge with the challenge itself, becoming one with the cognitive landscape. Most species approached the challenge as a pure computational problem. They sought to break down the multidimensional puzzle into its smallest components, analyzing each fragment with microscopic precision. Their strategies were linear, methodical, built on millennia of established scientific understanding. Maya saw something different. To her, the challenge was less a problem to be solved and more a conversation to be understood. Where others saw complexity, she perceived patterns, intricate relationships that danced at the edge of perception. Her background in ecosystem adaptation had taught her that the most complex systems were not conquered, but collaborated with. The first test segment began. Holographic representations of quantum states twisted and morphed, creating challenges that would shatter the computational abilities of most species. Mathematical constructs became living entities, shifting and changing with each participant's approach. Zorix watched with what could only be described as professional detachment. Humanity had been the subject of considerable debate within the Nexus Collective, a young species, barely a blip in galactic history, now standing among civilizations that had existed for millions of years. Most believed this was an exercise in humility, a chance for humans to understand their true place in the universal hierarchy. But something about Maya's approach caught the adjudicator's attention. While other participants attacked the challenge with pure computational force, she moved with a fluidity that defied traditional understanding. Her interactions were less about solving and more about understanding, less about conquering and more about exploring. The first stage of the stellar convergence test had begun, and humanity's representative was about to show the universe something entirely unexpected. The quantum challenge unfolded like a living, breathing entity, where other participants saw a series of complex mathematical constructs. Maya perceived a narrative, a story waiting to be understood rather than a problem to be solved. Her first approach drew confused murmurs from the observing alien delegates. Instead of immediately applying computational strategies, she began to sketch, not equations or diagrams, but a series of interconnected images that seemed to capture the essence of the quantum landscape. Her hand moved with the precision of a concert pianist and the intuition of an ecological researcher. The sketches were unlike anything the Nexus Collective had ever witnessed. They combined elements of natural ecosystem mapping, musical composition notation, and quantum probability models. Each line seemed to pulse with a living energy, capturing the dynamic nature of the quantum challenge in a way that transcended traditional scientific representation. Dr. Chen drew inspiration from her most unexpected experiences. She recalled her time with the Yanomami people in the Amazon, learning how they mapped complex environmental relationships through intricate storytelling. She remembered the way jazz musicians created music, not by following strict rules, but by understanding the space between the notes, the conversations happening in the silence. The quantum puzzle responded to her approach in ways no one could have predicted. As she sketched, the holographic representations began to shift. Mathematical constructs that had remained static for other participants started to dance, to breathe, to communicate. It was as if the challenge itself was engaging in a dialogue with her unique perspective. Zorix, the lead adjudicator, leaned forward with something approaching genuine curiosity. The other alien representatives watched in a mixture of confusion and growing fascination. Humanity's representative was not solving the puzzle, she was conversing with it. Maya's background had prepared her for this moment in ways no traditional education could have predicted. Her doctoral work had been an interdisciplinary exploration that defied standard academic boundaries. She had studied quantum mechanics, but also spent years understanding ecological adaptation, musical composition, and cross-cultural communication. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. As she completed a sketch that mapped the quantum challenge's probability states onto a structure reminiscent of a rainforest ecosystem, the holographic display began to resonate. Probability waves that had remained fixed started to show unprecedented flexibility. Other participants approached the challenge with rigid computational methods. The Quantum Harmony Collective broke down the puzzle into millions of microscopic algorithmic components. The Stellar Weave representative applied pure energy manipulation, attempting to force the quantum states into submission. Maya did something entirely different. She began to treat the quantum puzzle like a living conversation. Each mathematical construct became a character in an unfolding story. Probability waves were not static mathematical expressions, but dynamic entities with their own potential and purpose. She was not solving a problem. She was building a relationship. The observing scientists from various species began to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. Humanity's approach was not about conquering the challenge but understanding it. Where others saw obstacles, Maya saw opportunities for communication. Her sketches started to reveal patterns that defied conventional understanding. She mapped quantum probability states using musical chord progressions, showing how different quantum possibilities could harmonize or clash like musical notes. She used ecological migration patterns to demonstrate how quantum states could move and adapt. The Nexus Collective's data recorders worked overtime. They had never seen an approach that so completely reimagined the nature of scientific investigation. Maya was not just thinking outside the box. She was demonstrating that the box itself was a limited concept. As the first stage of the challenge progressed, the quantum puzzle began to respond in increasingly complex ways. It was no longer a static problem to be solved, but a dynamic environment to be understood. The holographic displays shifted and breathed, creating patterns that seemed to dance between mathematical precision and artistic expression. Zorix realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Humanity's representative was not just participating in the stellar convergence test. She was rewriting the fundamental understanding of how intelligence could interact with the most complex systems in the universe. The first stage was drawing to a close, and everything the galactic community thought they knew about problem-solving was about to change. The quantum arena transformed around Maya Chen, responding to her unique approach in ways that defied every known principle of scientific observation. What had begun as a seemingly impossible challenge was now becoming a dynamic conversation between human creativity and cosmic complexity. The other participants watched in growing disbelief. The Quantum Harmony Collective's silicon-based representatives began to recalibrate their computational matrices, their translucent bodies flickering with increasing uncertainty. Their precise, logic-driven approach was being systematically undermined by something they could not quantify or predict. Maya's method of engagement continued to evolve. She began to introduce elements from her most unexpected areas of expertise. A musical phrase from a Bach concerto became a mathematical translation of quantum probability. An ecological migration pattern from Arctic tern research transformed into a method of navigating multi-dimensional probability states. Zorix, the lead adjudicator, found himself in uncharted territory. The Nexus Collective had designed the stellar convergence test to be the ultimate intellectual barrier, a challenge that would definitively demonstrate the intellectual hierarchy of galactic civilizations. Humanity was not supposed to be a serious contender. They were meant to be a footnote, a young species learning its place in the universal order. But Maya was rewriting those expectations with every moment. The quantum challenge began to display characteristics that defied scientific understanding. Where previous participants had encountered rigid, immovable computational barriers, the test now seemed to be adapting, responding, almost communicating with Maya's approach. Her background in cross-cultural communication proved to be an unexpected advantage. She treated the quantum puzzle not as a problem to be solved, but as an intelligent entity to be understood. Each interaction was a negotiation, a delicate dance of mutual exploration. The holographic displays around her began to shift in unprecedented ways. Probability waves that had remained static for millennia started to show flexibility, movement, almost a sense of potential. It was as if the very fabric of quantum reality was engaging in a dialogue with her unique perspective. Other species representatives began to lean forward, their initial mockery replaced by a growing sense of uncertainty. The Stellar Weave Confederation's energy-based representative started to display signs of genuine confusion. Their understanding of computational challenges was being fundamentally challenged. Maya's approach combined elements that seemed completely incompatible. She used principles of musical composition to map quantum probability states. Ecological adaptation models became a method of understanding multi-dimensional computational landscapes. Her scientific approach was less about rigid analysis and more about dynamic communication. The first major breakthrough came unexpectedly, as she completed a complex sketch that mapped quantum states onto a structure inspired by the social communication patterns of honeybee colonies. The entire quantum arena seemed to pause. For a moment, everything went completely still. Then something extraordinary happened. The quantum challenge began to respond in ways that no one could have predicted. Probability states that had been locked for generations started to show unprecedented flexibility. Mathematical constructs that were considered immovable began to shift and dance. Zorix realized they were witnessing something more than just an intellectual challenge. This was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligence could interact with the most complex systems in the universe. Humanity was not just participating in the test, they were transforming the very nature of the test itself. The other participants from advanced civilizations watched in growing disbelief. Their computational approaches, refined over millennia of scientific progress, were being systematically outmaneuvered by a method that seemed to defy all established scientific principles. Maya continued her work, seemingly unaware of the growing tension in the arena. To her, this was not about winning or losing. It was about understanding, about finding connections where others saw only complexity. Her approach was less about conquering the challenge and more about having a conversation with the fundamental nature of reality. As the first stage of the stellar convergence test drew to a close, one thing became abundantly clear. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and they were about to show the universe that intelligence was far more complex than any civilization had ever imagined. The turning tide had begun. The stellar convergence test entered its most challenging phase. The Nexus Collective unleashed a series of computational obstacles designed to break the spirit of even the most advanced civilizations. These were not mere puzzles, but intricate psychological labyrinths that had crushed the computational resolve of species far older and more technologically advanced than humanity. Maya Chen stood at the center of a holographic maelstrom that would have driven most minds to complete cognitive collapse. The challenge now became a multi-dimensional battlefield of perception, where reality itself was the primary weapon. The first psychological barrier manifested as a living memory landscape. Participants were forced to navigate through intricate representations of their own cognitive histories, facing computational projections of their deepest fears, most challenging memories, and fundamental limitations. Most species approached this with traditional defensive computational strategies, attempting to wall off vulnerable cognitive spaces. Maya did something entirely different. She embraced the memory landscape as a living ecosystem of experience. Where others sought to defend, she chose to explore. Her background in cross-cultural psychology and ecological adaptation gave her a unique perspective. Each memory became not a vulnerability, but a source of strength, a complex network of experiences that could be navigated rather than avoided. The Quantum Harmony Collective's representatives began to fracture first. Their silicon-based computational matrices couldn't process the deeply emotional terrain. Their approach relied on strict logical partitioning, a method that shattered when confronted with the nuanced, non-linear nature of lived experience. Zorix watched with increasing fascination. The test was designed to be impossible. It was meant to demonstrate the vast intellectual gulf between established galactic civilizations and emerging species like humanity. No participant had ever successfully navigated this stage in the test's millennia-long history. Maya's approach transformed the very nature of the challenge. She began to treat the memory landscape as a collaborative environment. Complex emotional experiences became problem-solving tools. A moment of childhood vulnerability revealed a unique approach to computational thinking. A professional challenge became a method of understanding multi-dimensional probability. The other alien representatives began to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. Humanity's representative was not just surviving the psychological challenge. She was thriving within it. Where others saw barriers, Maya saw opportunities for growth and understanding. The test introduced increasingly complex layers of psychological complexity. Quantum probability states became intertwined with emotional landscapes. Mathematical constructs merged with deeply personal memories. It was a challenge that required not just intellectual capacity, but a profound understanding of consciousness itself. Maya drew upon her most diverse experiences. Her time working with indigenous communities in the Amazon became a method of navigating complex emotional territories. Musical composition techniques transformed into strategies for computational adaptation. Her scientific training merged with her artistic intuition in ways that defied traditional understanding. The Stellar Weave Confederation's representative began to display signs of genuine concern. Their energy-based computational system was designed to process pure information, not the complex, nuanced landscape that Maya was creating. They watched as she transformed what should have been a destructive psychological challenge into a collaborative exploration. Each obstacle became an opportunity. Computational barriers that had been designed to create cognitive fracture instead became bridges of understanding. Maya's approach was less about overcoming the challenge and more about understanding its fundamental nature. Zorix realized they were witnessing a fundamental reimagining of intelligence itself. Humanity was demonstrating a form of cognitive flexibility that went beyond traditional computational thinking. It was an approach that saw complexity not as a barrier, but as a living, breathing system to be understood and collaborated with. As the psychological stage of the test reached its peak, the entire quantum arena seemed to hold its breath. The holographic displays shifted and transformed, responding to Maya's unique approach in ways that defied every established principle of scientific observation. The Nexus Collective had designed the test to be unbeatable. They had created a challenge that combined the most complex psychological and computational barriers known to any galactic civilization. Humanity was about to prove them wrong. The psychological stage of the Stellar Convergence test was drawing to a close, and everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligence was about to change. The quantum arena transformed into a landscape of pure potential. Maya Chen stood at its center, no longer just a participant, but a fundamental force of reimagination. The Stellar Convergence test had become something entirely unexpected, a dialogue between human creativity and the very fabric of computational reality. Zorix and the Nexus Collective representatives watched with a growing sense of unprecedented uncertainty. Their millennia of scientific understanding were being systematically dismantled by humanity's representative. What had begun as a demonstration of galactic intellectual hierarchy was now a profound exploration of intelligence itself. Maya's breakthrough came from an unexpected synthesis of her most diverse experiences. She began to see the quantum challenge not as a series of computational problems, but as a living, breathing ecosystem of possibility. Her approach combined elements that should have been fundamentally incompatible: ecological adaptation, musical composition, quantum mechanics, and cross-cultural communication. The holographic displays around her began to pulse with a rhythm that defied traditional scientific understanding. Probability waves danced in patterns that were simultaneously mathematical and artistic. Complex computational barriers dissolved and reformed, creating landscapes of pure potential that shifted with each of Maya's insights. Other species representatives watched in growing disbelief. The Quantum Harmony Collective's silicon-based computational matrices began to show signs of fundamental recalibration. Their precise, logic-driven approach was being challenged by a method of thinking that existed beyond established scientific paradigms. Maya's breakthrough was rooted in her unique understanding of complex systems. She treated the quantum challenge as a collaborative environment, not a problem to be solved. Each computational barrier became an opportunity for conversation, each mathematical construct a potential for mutual understanding. The test introduced increasingly complex challenges. Dimensional barriers that had remained impenetrable for millennia began to show unexpected flexibility. Computational landscapes that should have been rigid started to breathe and adapt. It was as if the very nature of reality was engaging in a dialogue with human potential. Her approach drew from her most unexpected areas of expertise. A musical phrase became a method of navigating quantum probability. An ecological migration pattern transformed into a strategy for computational adaptation. Scientific precision merged with artistic intuition in ways that defied traditional understanding. The Stellar Weave Confederation's energy-based representative began to display genuine fascination. Their advanced computational system, designed to process pure information, was being systematically challenged by an approach that saw complexity as a living, breathing entity. Zorix realized they were witnessing something far more profound than an intellectual challenge. This was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligence could interact with the most complex systems in the universe. Humanity was not just participating in the test, they were transforming the very nature of the test itself. Maya's method of engagement continued to evolve. She began to introduce concepts that merged the seemingly unmergeable. Quantum mechanics became a language of communication. Probability states were treated as living entities with their own potential and purpose. Mathematical constructs danced with emotional intelligence in ways that defied every established scientific principle. The quantum arena began to respond in unprecedented ways. Probability waves that had remained fixed for generations started to show remarkable flexibility. Mathematical barriers that were considered immovable began to shift and transform. It was as if the very fabric of computational reality was being rewritten. Other participants from advanced civilizations watched in growing amazement. Their computational approaches, refined over millennia of scientific progress, were being systematically outmaneuvered by a method that seemed to defy all established understanding. Maya continued her work, seemingly unaware of the growing tension in the arena. To her, this was not about winning or losing. It was about understanding, about finding connections where others saw only complexity. Her approach was less about conquering the challenge and more about having a conversation with the fundamental nature of reality. As the breakthrough stage of the stellar convergence test drew to a close, one thing became abundantly clear. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage with a method of thinking that would forever change the understanding of intelligence. The breakthrough was complete, and the universe would never be the same. The final stage of the stellar convergence test descended upon the quantum arena like a living entity. This was the ultimate challenge, a computational landscape so complex that it had remained unsolved for millennia. Civilizations far older and more technologically advanced than humanity had shattered against its impossible barriers. Maya Chen stood at the center of a holographic maelstrom that defied every known principle of scientific understanding. The challenge was no longer just a test of intelligence. It was a conversation with the fundamental nature of reality itself. Zorks and the Nexus Collective watched with a mixture of anticipation and growing uncertainty. Their millennia-old system of galactic hierarchy was about to be challenged in ways they could never have anticipated. Humanity's representative had already demolished every computational barrier they had designed. The final challenge materialized as a multi-dimensional puzzle that existed simultaneously across different planes of existence. It was a computational landscape that required understanding not just of mathematical principles, but of the very nature of consciousness, probability, and potential. Where other participants had approached previous stages with rigid computational strategies, Maya saw an invitation to explore. Her background in ecological adaptation, cross-cultural communication, and quantum mechanics converged in a method of engagement that was less about solving and more about understanding. The Quantum Harmony Collective's representatives watched in growing disbelief. Their silicon-based computational matrices, designed to process information with machine-like precision, were finding themselves fundamentally inadequate. Maya's approach defied every established principle of scientific investigation. She began to treat the final challenge as a living conversation. Mathematical constructs became characters in an unfolding narrative. Probability waves were not static mathematical expressions, but dynamic entities with their own potential and purpose. Each computational barrier was an opportunity for mutual understanding. The holographic displays around her began to pulse with a rhythm that merged mathematical precision with artistic expression. Probability states danced in patterns that were simultaneously analytical and intuitive. Complex dimensional barriers dissolved and reformed, creating landscapes of pure potential that shifted with each of Maya's insights. Her method drew from her most diverse experiences. A musical composition technique became a method of navigating quantum probability. An ecological migration pattern transformed into a strategy for dimensional exploration. Scientific precision merged with artistic intuition in ways that challenged the very understanding of intelligence. The Stellar Weave Confederation's energy-based representative began to display signs of genuine fascination. Their advanced computational system was being challenged by an approach that saw complexity as a living, breathing ecosystem of potential. Maya introduced concepts that merged the seemingly unmergeable. Quantum mechanics became a language of communication. Probability states were treated as living entities with their own stories and potential. Mathematical constructs danced with emotional intelligence in ways that defied every established scientific principle. The quantum arena began to respond in unprecedented ways. Dimensional barriers that had remained impenetrable for generations started to show remarkable flexibility. Computational landscapes that should have been rigid began to breathe and adapt. It was as if the very fabric of reality was engaging in a dialogue with human potential. Zorix realized they were witnessing something far more profound than an intellectual challenge. This was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligence could interact with the most complex systems in the universe. Humanity was not just participating in the test, they were transforming the very nature of understanding itself. Other participants from advanced civilizations watched in growing amazement. Their computational approaches, refined over millennia of scientific progress, were being systematically outmaneuvered by a method that seemed to defy all established understanding. As the final stage reached its peak, the entire quantum arena seemed to hold its collective breath. The holographic displays shifted and transformed, responding to Maya's unique approach in ways that defied every known principle of scientific observation. The Nexus Collective had designed the test to be unbeatable. They had created a challenge that combined the most complex computational and dimensional barriers known to any galactic civilization. Humanity was about to prove them wrong. The final stage of the stellar convergence test was drawing to a close, and everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligence was about to change forever. The moment of resolution arrived with a silence more profound than any sound. Maya Chen stood at the center of the quantum arena, having completed the stellar convergence test in a way that defied every established understanding of intelligence, computation, and possibility. Zorix and the Nexus Collective representatives found themselves in uncharted territory. The test they had designed to demonstrate the intellectual hierarchy of galactic civilizations had become something entirely unexpected, a profound exploration of consciousness itself. The quantum arena began to transform, its holographic displays responding to Maya's final insights in ways that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. Probability waves danced and merged, creating landscapes of potential that existed beyond traditional dimensional understanding. What had begun as a computational challenge had become a conversation about the very nature of awareness. Other participants from advanced civilizations watched in a mixture of awe and fundamental uncertainty. The Quantum Harmony Collective's silicon-based representatives found their computational matrices recalibrating in real time. The Stellar Weave Confederation's energy-based participants observed a method of thinking that existed beyond their most advanced theoretical models. Maya's approach had never been about defeating the challenge. It was about understanding, about finding connections where others saw only complexity. Her method merged disciplines that should have been fundamentally incompatible. Quantum mechanics danced with ecological adaptation, musical composition intertwined with computational theory. The final resolution came not as a solution, but as a revelation. Humanity had demonstrated a form of intelligence that was simultaneously more fluid and more precise than any civilization had previously understood. It was an approach that saw complexity not as a barrier to be overcome, but as a living system to be understood and collaborated with. Zorix realized they were witnessing a fundamental transformation of galactic understanding. The test had been designed to be unbeatable, to demonstrate the vast intellectual gulf between established civilizations and emerging species. Instead, it had become a window into a new way of perceiving reality itself. The quantum arena began to compile the results, its computational systems working in ways they had never been designed to function. Traditional metrics of success became meaningless. What Maya had accomplished went far beyond solving a challenge. She had redefined the very concept of problem-solving. Alien representatives from across the galaxy watched as the holographic displays compiled their findings. Traditional computational analysis gave way to something more nuanced, more alive. The test results were less a score and more a complex narrative of potential and possibility. Maya's approach had drawn from her most diverse experiences. Her time working with indigenous communities in the Amazon became a method of understanding complex systemic interactions. Musical composition techniques transformed into strategies for navigating multidimensional probability. Scientific precision merged with artistic intuition in a way that challenged every established understanding of intelligence. The Nexus Collective found themselves facing a profound moment of transformation. The galactic hierarchy they had maintained for millennia was being fundamentally reimagined. Humanity was not just a participant in the cosmic conversation. They were becoming a fundamental force of understanding. As the final computations completed, something extraordinary happened. The quantum arena itself seemed to respond with a form of recognition. Probability waves that had remained fixed for generations began to show unprecedented flexibility. Mathematical constructs that were considered immovable started to shift and transform. Other participants began to understand that this was more than just a test. It was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligence could interact with the most complex systems in the universe. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, not through technological might, but through a unique way of perceiving and engaging with complexity. Zorix approached Maya, his crystalline form shifting in ways that suggested a profound emotional response. The traditional ceremonial protocols of the stellar convergence test gave way to something more nuanced, more alive. This was not a moment of victory, but a moment of mutual understanding. The galaxy watched as humanity was introduced not as a young, emerging species, but as a fundamental force of cognitive potential. The stellar convergence test had become something far more profound than its creators had ever imagined. A conversation about the nature of intelligence itself. As the quantum arena began to dissolve, one thing became abundantly clear: everything had changed. The universe would never be the same again.